might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys or regulators. They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank and they work with that bank. Then they exchange. I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, all these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically they call them straw donors because it's like, if I give money to you to give, and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery to expose. But, like, I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about.
Finance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs, and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just the problem is a lot of it's a black box.
Oh,
or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. So CZ says, "Hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth."
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. Caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this FTX's influence went from the Bahamas reaching into the United States while technically not really being regulated by the United States.
Yeah, they were the number 2 donor to the Democratic Party.
Victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked.
Why the celebrities are important. And that's why
it's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part, yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, there's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
And it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly some
bizarre that so many people got duped, and I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
I'll have to. My feeling is offshore entities should not be. They're not subject to our rules. How can you allow offshore, I don't know. It's very. You think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth. X dollars. Let's say it's worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. From the arms of one huckster to another. It's almost to something worse. They're a very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer. His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called, you do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Was a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Of that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets, so you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. There's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative.
I watched the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah.
About him trying
That's John Ray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to unravel it. and it's amazing.
They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what they're setting it up with, like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
Act that bill, and now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. The problem is, when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store. Is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a private call, leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. I, too, am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money there.
Is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin. Like what are the regulations in terms of like what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to. So I decided to start pursuing it step by step, and at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course, and then what? I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane, but they bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names, and also
don't really understand what's going, like the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are they doing? Try to break it down for us. Like, first of all,
really taking that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two? Views about what? Like, you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. And
so when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? You know, how does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
You put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does that work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX, where's the money? I don't know, but he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you lied my way into it, I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do the money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable riv of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big kind of scam, he lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. Okay, so can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, and it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through who's...
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C. Most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. He cleaned up on all his own customers. Just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out abilities. It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States... He thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did, but I start doing that, and after I cover get-rich-quick schemes for a while, actually campaign finance laws I've heard are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate money and go start trading with it, unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. He's like, well, like think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere. And then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're great, they kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent. Because we had taken a look at their numbers, and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the token.
Party.
That's right, but...
Also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah.
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about, I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to stop making these videos. I just FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
Somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, you can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put access 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month, 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. Senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to, this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US was rich. Like, you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100, and that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like,
Analogy for losing your house.
It's funny. Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say after the fact, he's like, still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like, we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round, or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
Or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it he's
like investment funds? They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it.
People that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was a fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. Very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. I used to play like a variant of League. So I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist.
Involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I studied, I find out like there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Well, anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy, Dan Free. I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff, and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil. Or any. He's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house. Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they like to get paid.
He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and he knew crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea, and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira. Is he on Twitter? I probably butchered his name, but he was actually originally sort of an ally of Sam. So he invested in FTX early on, put $100 million in, and everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So there's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said,
do something like that? Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is one of the... This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing, such as FTX in 2019. And that's a crypto platform where, honestly, you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity, the company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, you know, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage to their other friends. They're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people...
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
You're like, it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go. You put your fiat, really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange, or, you know, something like Europe or something like that, is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're in your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, you know, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, you know, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to, he's doing interviews with what that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our balance, which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense. But right, people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated with everybody. I asked him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey.
Figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, I mean, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, what they wanted to store some Bitcoin with Tom Brady. They wanted to be alongside Tom Brady. So he's like, well, you know, there was fungibility between wallets. But I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, you know, a lot of people had badly going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there, and all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX,
easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. This stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. You know, for one of the first times, it was kind of... Yeah, tokens like is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. You know, now, if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, they've recently been shut down. But... The idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better?
It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So Sam goes, oh, you won like our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like how you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's all. And ultimately, one of the ways, like even some of the candidates they donated to were through like a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were like donating through him for like all these like actually his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. You believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job. Like, be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just Coinbase. It seems like they're, legitimate. But so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this backdoor balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. It's you eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when you have Dogecoin, you have SafeMoon, you have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, you can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games and that's why I lost the money.
But the account, fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured and wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have your Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of two Harvard lawyers. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into it. So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to it was the terms of touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be. Your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually, and that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. So we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, he was the most notorious and well-respected pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on
executives Ryan Salami or something.